Hi everybody, I'm Claire and welcome to my video blog. It's amazing. We have won the Leave Brexit vote. Obviously everybody will have heard this by now. I'm not going to spend too much time on the detail of the news. Obviously it's an extraordinary, wonderful thing for us all who believed in this. And I was up all night following the results, as probably were millions of other people, and I've been reliving it today, now that I'm slightly much caught up with my sleep a little bit. I've been reliving it again today through the wonderful millennial woes, who did an all-night Brexit hangout for his alt-right friends, and I was with my own friends on Facebook overnight. But Millennial Woes had a hangout that had quite a high attendance, I think, and I was catching up on it just now, and it was obviously just such an amazing experience, and it was one of the things that I found very curious about it was the way that it started off with the prediction that we were going to lose. Which I felt was kind of strange. Not that I was absolutely certain we were going to win. I put a tenner on us winning Leave, so I'm going to be going down later and collecting my winnings on that. But we did feel, obviously, that it was quite possibly going to be stolen from us one way or another, either through virtue signalling and mind gaming of people through propaganda, or possibly a bit of vote rigging. Anyway, there was a miracle, and it happened. Part of that miracle was the weather favouring the areas that were voting Leave, and not favouring those areas where they were expected to vote Remain. And if they had felt as strongly as we did, they wouldn't have let the weather put them off. But I suppose, I think there's a possible metaphor there, because the people who want to be part of the European Union are the kind of people who would stay at home if it's raining. Whereas the people who would vote Leave would go out and vote regardless. But then the sun, didn't put any obstacles in our way. So that was wonderful. Now, I've been very disappointed by the calls from some quarters that this is not sufficient, we need another vote. That dreadful Chucker person saying over on the BBC when this was coming out, as it was becoming clear basically that our side had won. It was not a few thousand votes, it was actually 1.12 million or something in that region, considerably over a million. It was a decisive margin that nobody could say, oh, this is a quibble, 49.9, 51.1. And I think that we're going to have to be firm with these people. If we had lost, if the Remain camp had won through all their shenanigans, they would be saying to us, suck it up, folks, suck it up. Get used to it. We're in the EU for good. That's the end of Britain. All you nasty racist nationalists. That's the end, right? And I'm sure UKIP would have carried on, but that's what we would have had to have put up with, right? I'm quite happy to be magnanimous to those Remainers who will accept. This has been the choice. This has been the will of the people, and this is where we're going to go forward. And if they accept that, then I have no problem with it. I will not, I will not act self-righteous towards them, anything like that. It's just it's a matter that's decided, and it's over. We don't need to talk about it unless these bloody SJW whingers, the social justice warriors, are already squirming around on Twitter demanding, oh well, we need another right. I'm not the world's biggest fan of David Cameron, but I was very impressed by his speech. He understands something about decorum, and it's not his resignation that I'm particularly impressed by, but the several sentences that he spoke about the referendum, because all the rest is an appendage. What happens to him, blah, 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 blah. It's all an appendage. What is the matter? What is the point in issue here now is that the Leave camp, we have won, right? And the Remain, SJWs, whatever people must stop it, right? And this is why I say I'm not the world's biggest fan of David Cameron, but I really, really liked what he said. I really, really, really respected, and I noticed certain key words, certain key sentences, certain commitments that he put through, that he said there in front of number 10 Downing Street, in front of the world's media, right? In front of the world's media. This was the most pondered over, the most thought over, the most anticipated event of a very long time in Europe. And if it wasn't for Donald Trump's candidacy in America, it would be the most important thing that would be happening in the world this year, and it probably still is. So what did David Cameron say? Right, well, he spoke for several minutes, but I would like to point out 3 sentences that he said. He said, the British people have voted to leave the EU, and their will must be respected. He has said, our will must be respected, right? This is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland saying that the British people have voted to leave the EU and their will must be respected, right? Then he said a little bit later on, further down, he said, the will of the British people is an instruction that must be delivered. It must not only be respected. So get off our backs, social justice warriors and Remainer scum who are still whining about it, and accept the fact that you not only have to respect us, but this is an instruction that must be delivered. And finally, just to seal this, just to make it absolutely emphatic, this is the way that it is going to be. A little bit later down, shortly after, he said that the will of the British people is an instruction that must be delivered. There can be no doubt. There can be no doubt about the result. Right? There can be no doubt about the result. So Chuka Umunna, who's saying, oh, 48% of people didn't vote for this. Get over it, mate. Get over it. This is an instruction that must be delivered, and there is no doubt about the result. And respect the will. All these people who are now London seceding from the. I mean, these people, right? They are clutching at straws, and they're in delusion land. And one of the things I want to read you some stuff now. I want to spend a few moments reading a few pieces here that came to my mind. Now, this is taking a slightly different view, and if you're not into, kind of inner worlds, you might find this a bit obscure, but stay with me and see what you think about this, because I have a very strong view on the world, which I see in Jungian terms, Jungian archetypal collective psyche, and so we see in the world certain forces where it's so much, the forces that drive our world are so much deeper than the mere surface of economy and politics. And this is what we've seen emerge yesterday morning. This is something deeper. This is a Jungian collective response. And I'm particularly interested in the way that mythology and literature and art represent the dynamics and the archetypes and the expression of the will and drives of the mind, of the collective unconscious, of the individual unconscious, right? And one of the mythologies that I found absolutely paramount in my own literary exploration has been that of Tolkien and the world of Middle-earth and Lord of the Rings, and I've also kind of come out of a previous engagement with what you might call New Age thought, and there is some truth in it, but there is also a great deal of deception. And there was this idea, and I think these are archetypal ideas, so it's not like a literal thing necessarily, but we were expected to think it was, which is one of the deceptions about it. But if you allow these things, they may manifest in unexpected ways. So what I'm very interested in is that even as recently as last year, when I did an interview about my book, which I can talk about another time, on the 100th Monkey radio show, because my book was about the 100th Monkey phenomenon, these guys who were interviewing me were still talking in terms of New Age concepts, which I had, kind of dallied with 20 odd years ago in the early mid-90s, before I realised that these had to be seen in larger mythological contexts. Anyway, this idea that they were still kind of clinging to was the idea that there would be some massive moment of enlightenment where the whole world would get it, like you might postulate that it was going to be on 2012 and all that sort of stuff, and I kind of by the time 2012 came around, I kind of realised this wasn't going to be the way it was going to be, but nonetheless I still held some kind of notion in my mind that there is some kind of collective process that goes on in the world. But there are different competing collectives. This is one of the things that I've come to realise, certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, and that the idea that everybody will come suddenly to some enlightened moment of agreement, of understanding of each other, and everybody will forgive each other, is kind of an illusion. It's just too much process involved in moving through that. It's actually not possible to let go of all that stuff, unless we all took some shared psychedelic experience, and that wouldn't last forever. A few hours later it'd be all over and we'd be going, what can we do? So what I think in a way is that, and when I came to this idea a few months ago, and I hadn't realised that how it might relate to the EU and to the Brexit, because I was still kind of distant from it. It was all kind of surged up as a great big collective thing, really only over a very short space of time. And the idea came to me just before this all surged up, and that idea was that I was reflecting upon this because I still know people who have this New Age notion of all this collective enlightenment will be something that will happen instantaneously, and I've always thought this is a bit tenuous, it's a bit amorphous, it's a bit speculative. Whatever there's in it is probably needs developing a little bit, right? And I remember thinking that perhaps because I've always been so fascinated by the Lord of the Ring, and I have felt that the image of the ring is a very, very powerful meta symbol, that is some way. I don't believe that Tolkien would have been so successful if he was not expressing some collective archetypal things from the collective unconscious of the northern peoples, of the European peoples, because that's what it was about. It was about the languages and it was about the peoples. And even though he it's well known he denied there was any allegory in there, that's not the point. What's the point is that he's actually expressing the deep mythology of the underlying psychology of the northern peoples. So he doesn't have to get into any form of allegory or anything, because he's expressing something that is already got that quality in its very nature. That is what it is, right? It is the ancestral wisdom and archetypal psychology of the collective of our peoples, right? So anyway, so I've had this kind of this idea of the globalism is like Sauron and the Ring wanting to extend its hand to control the whole world, enforce everything on everybody. And I thought, well, probably what would happen is if in some way there was some moment when suddenly we realised that the threat of globalism was over, and that the corporate global cartel, of whom people like George Soros and Goldman Sachs and Tony Blair, George Bush, all those people, that they are the representatives of, they're the front men of the, whoever they are behind the scenes, Rothschilds, Zionists, whatever, Bilderbergs, of course, they've been meeting recently. They met just before the Brexit, and who knows whether they had anything to do with the various mind games and psyops. But so I gradually began to realise that the EU was the local arm. In fact, I shall have to do a video blog or write a blog sometime on that, on the fact that it seemed there was you get very strange archetypal coincidences turning up, which are probably completely unconscious. They just happen to coincide and have some kind of archetypal meaning, right? And this one was, a few months ago, I realised that CERN, the ring of CERN, is almost the same as the ring of Sauron. Now, I know that part of it takes place in Switzerland, and that's not part of the EU, but nonetheless, there was a kind of strange archetypal resonance there. And it occurred to me that if I'll just leave that aside as a symbol, but the EU seemed to have a kind of dominant influence on the psyche, and at the same time there was an emerging archetypal force that represented, that there was the expression of the European peoples, that they were feeling that this was some kind of thing like the rule of Sauron. So and then after it was all over, because when that night, we all started out thinking we lost. It's amazing, and we pulled it back. Talk about snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. It was just absolutely stunning and awesome, and I just had to spend yesterday kind of processing and absorbing it, because then I realised that all these social justice warriors who are still clamouring, right, they're kind of like ghosts and Nazgul and things, and they're just going to be blown away because of what David Cameron said. And it's the honour, it's the honour of him, it's the honour of this nation that this will should be respected, and that the instruction must be delivered, and that there is no doubt about the result. So I kind of felt like suddenly there was a fresh breeze that's blowing away the empire. People who know Paul Cantor will get that reference. And my neighbour came round to me after I'd slept half the day, and I was up and I was making dinner. And my neighbour came round with a miniature of wine and a glass, and she gave it to me, and she said, "Oh, we're all so pleased." And because I'd had the sign outside the front of the house, and all been talk amongst the neighbours, and somebody had stolen it, and then I put it back up again with a stronger version and everything. And I began to feel there was this kind of collective joy, and despite these whining miseries who are fearing the end of the world, there was this kind of great sense of joy and everything. And I thought, actually, this is that moment that all these new agers have been predicting, and yet it's complete reverse of what the propaganda in the new, it's like, oh, we're all going to be wake up into all being social justice warriors or something. But it's completely the opposite. All it is, and this is what I realised a few months ago, is what this is the shadow is lifted. we're at the beginning. This is a very long, we have a very long task of reconstruction. But this is the shadow is cast away, and the phantasms will claw at our heels. But this is the beginning, and so this is I want to read a few of the passages from The Return of the King. There we go, The Return of the King. Lovely original George Allen and Unwin hardback copy, rather well worn. And then I want to, if I may, read out just a few sections of the sections of where he describes the fall of Sauron from the various different perspectives. First from Frodo, actually in Mount Doom, and then with Gandalf and Aragorn and the company, and then finally Faramir and Éowyn back in Minas Tirith in the city of Gondor. So I'll start with the final ending of the ring, and think of Gollum and Sauron as two aspects of the EU. Precious, 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 Gollum cried, my precious, oh my precious! And with that, even as his eyes were lifted up to gloat on his prize, he stepped too far, toppled, wavered for a moment on the brink, and then with a shriek he fell. Out of the depths came his last wail, precious! And he was gone. And I think of George Soros as being like Gollum, that kind of grasping mentality. There was a roar and a great confusion of noise. Fires leapt up and lit the roof. This is all the turmoil in the markets and all the chaos. Their throbbing grew to a great tumult, and the mountain shook. Sam ran to Frodo and picked him up and carried him out to the door. And there upon the dark threshold of the Samath Nar, high above the plains of Mordor, such wonder and terror came on him that he stood still, forgetting all else, and gazed as one turned to stone. And now this is the collapse of the edifice of the mind of Sauron. A brief vision he had of swirling cloud, and in the midst of it towers and battlements, tall as hills, founded upon a mighty mountain throne above immeasurable pits. Great courts and dungeons, eyeless prisons, sheer as cliffs, and gaping gates of steel and adamant. This is the edifice of the EU in Brussels. Where were we? And then all passed. Towers fell and mountains slid. Walls crumbled and melted, crashing down. Vast spires of smoke and spouting steams went billowing up, until they toppled like an overwhelming wave, and its wild crest curled and came foaming down upon the land. And then at last, over the miles between, there came a rumble, rising to a deafening crash and roar. The earth shook, the plain heaved and cracked, and Orod Druin reeled. Fire belched from its riven summit. The skies burst into thunder, seared with lightning. Down like lashing whips fell a torrent of black rain. And into the heart of the storm, with a cry that pierced all sounds, tearing the clouds asunder, the Nazgul came. These are the SJWs. Shooting like flaming bolts, as, caught in the fiery ruin of hill and sky, they crackled, withered, and went out. And then there are a couple of brief passages. There's the chapter of here we are. And here we are. This is the description of the same event from the point of view of Aragorn and the company in front of the Black Gate. Go I hear the Wind Lord and the Eagles have just come to their rescue. And the Nazgul turn and flee, but it's not from the Eagles. But the Nazgul turned and fled and vanished into Mordor's shadows, hearing a terrible call out of the dark tower. That's Junkers. And even at that moment, all the hosts of Mordor trembled. Doubt clutched their hearts, and their laughter failed. This is all the Remainers. It's not turning out the way we expected. Their hands shook, and their limbs were loosed. This is Merkel and Holland and all the rest of them, all the nameless presidents they have. The power that drove them on and filled them with hate and fury was wavering. Its will was removed from them, and now, looking in the eyes of their enemies, they saw a deadly light and were afraid. Then all the captains of the West cried aloud, for their hearts were filled with a new hope in the midst of darkness. Out from the beleaguered hills, knights of Gondor, riders of Rohan, Dunedain of the north, close-serried companies drove against their wavering foes, piercing their press with the thrust of bitter spears. But Gandalf lifted up his arms and called once more in a clear voice, "Stand, men of the West, stand and wait. This is the hour of doom." And even as he spoke, the earth rocked beneath their feet. Then, rising swiftly up, far above the towers of the Black Gate, high above the mountains, a vast soaring darkness sprang into the sky, flickering with fire. The earth groaned and quaked. The towers of the Teeth swayed, tottered, and fell down. The mighty rampart crumbled. The Black Gate was hurled in ruin, and from far away, now dim, now growing, now mounting to the clouds, there came a drumming rumble, a roar, a long echoing roll of ruinous noise. "The realm of Sauron is ended," said Gandalf. And then finally, from the turrets of the battlements of Minas Tirith in Gondor, where the recovering Faramir and Éowyn, who were injured in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, are recovering, and they weren't able to go to the Battle of the Black Gate. And Faramir and Éowyn are talking. These words actually are almost exact description of my own feelings in a slightly different way about how I felt about the referendum and the result of it. And Éowyn says, "I stand upon some dreadful brink, this is how I felt, and it is utterly dark in the abyss before my feet if we fell in." She's referring to her own personal feelings, but it can be applied to the abyss we would have faced. "But whether there is any light behind me I cannot tell, for I cannot turn yet. I wait for some stroke of doom." I think we all felt like that. "Yes, we wait for the stroke of doom," said Faramir. And they said no more. And it seemed to them, as they stood upon the wall, that the wind died, and the light failed, the sun was bleared, and all sounds in the city or in the lands about were hushed. Neither wind, nor voice, nor bird call, nor rustle of leaf, nor their own breath could be heard. The very beating of their hearts was stilled. Time halted. And as they stood so, their hands met and clasped, though they did not know it, and still they waited, for they knew not what. Then presently it seemed to them that above the ridges of the distant mountains another vast mountain of darkness rose, towering up like a wave that should engulf the world, and about its lightnings flickered. And then a tremor ran through the earth, and they felt the walls of the city quiver. A sound like a sigh went up from all the lands about them, and the hearts beat suddenly again. And so they stood on the walls of the city of Gondor, and a great wind rose and blew, and their hair, raven and golden, streamed out, mingling in the air. And the shadow departed, and the sun was unveiled, and light leapt forth, and the waters of Anduin shone like silver. And in all the houses of the city men sang for the joy that welled up in their hearts, from what source they could not tell. So I think it was a miracle. It was what people sometimes say, what is a miracle? A miracle is a welling through into normal reality of deeper laws than mere mechanical ones. People say, how did that happen? But it had to happen. And the shadow has passed. Thank God. Thank you for watching. That dreadful chucker person saying over on the BBC when this was coming out, as it was becoming clear basically that our side had won. It was not a few thousand votes, it was actually 1.12 million or something in that region, considerably over a million. It was a decisive margin that nobody could say, oh, this is a quibble, 49.9, 51.1. And I think that we're going to have to be firm with these people. If we had lost, if the Remain camp had won through all their shenanigans, they will be saying to us, suck it up, folks, suck it up, get used to it. Woes, who did an all-night Brexit hangout for his alt-right friends, and I was with my own friends on Facebook overnight. But Millennial Woes had a hangout that had quite a high attendance, I think, and I was catching up on it just now, and it was obviously just such an amazing experience, and it was one of the things that I found very curious about it was the way that it started off with the prediction that we were going to lose, which I felt was kind of strange. Not that I was absolutely certain, not favouring those areas where they were expected to vote Remain. And if they had felt as strongly as we did, they wouldn't have let the weather put them off. But I suppose, I think there's a possible metaphor there, because the people who want to be part of the European Union are the kind of people who would stay at home if it's raining. Whereas the people who would vote Leave would go out and vote regardless. But then the sun, didn't put any obstacles in our way. So that was wonderful. Now, I've been very disappointed by the calls from some quarters that this is not sufficient, we need another vote, we're going to win. I put a tenner on us winning Leave, so I'm going to be going down later and collecting my winnings on that. But we did feel, obviously, that it was quite possibly going to be stolen from us, one way or another, either through virtue signalling and mind gaming of people through propaganda, or possibly a bit of vote rigging. Anyway, there was a miracle, and it happened. part of that miracle was the weather favouring the areas that were voting Leave. And hi everybody, I'm Claire and welcome to my video blog. It's amazing. We have won the Leave Brexit vote. Obviously, everybody will have heard this by now. I'm not going to spend too much time on the detail of the news. Obviously, it's an extraordinary, wonderful thing for us all who believed in this. And I was up all night following the results, as probably were millions of other people. And I've been reliving it today, now that I'm slightly much caught up with my sleep a little bit. I've been reliving it again today through the wonderful millennial